Funded Today Nation, welcome back to Get Funded Today, the Funded Today podcast. This week, as promised, we are bringing you my special interview with Carson Jorgensen from his pretty famous podcast, The Definition of Success. I'm really excited to let you guys in on what we talked about. We get into quite a few things that are a little bit different than what we normally talk about on our podcast. I think you're going to like it. Talk about some business, life, happiness, and then probably most importantly, the whole idea of self-awareness. So let me know what you think about it, and let's get started.
The Funded Today podcast is brought to you by fundedtoday.com. Funded Today is a premier marketing and video agency. From startups to crowdfunding to Amazon and beyond, Funded Today has helped their clients generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. If you'd like help launching or growing your business, visit www.fundedtoday.com to speak with one of their experts.
All right, Funded Today Nation, here it is, my exclusive one-on-one interview with Carson Jorgensen from The Definition of Success. I hope you enjoy it.
So today I've got a really special guest. This guy, he's a pretty amazing guy. Zach Smith, he's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Funded Today. They work with crowdfunding, Kickstarter, and Indiegogo to help companies raise money. Did I say that right, Zach?
Yes, sir. That's pretty much exactly it, Carson.
Oh, good. And this isn't your first company either, is it, Zach?
No, I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, for better or for worse.
So I met Zach, what was it, probably a little over a year ago. He was speaking at a seminar at a local college, and a friend of mine invited me down there, and we just kind of almost became friends, and we actually ended up going fishing together a short time later, and we've just kind of talked on and off since then. But Zach has a really unique point of view when it comes to business, and he is ultra successful when it comes to businesses and starting companies. So maybe just tell us a little more about yourself, Zach, so that my listeners kind of have a little more context on who you really are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, I think we need to clarify something. We went fishing, but we didn't catch any fish. So does that count?
No, it doesn't. So we're going to have to go again.
Have to do that again.
That was poor. And it was cold.
It was a cold day, man. Windy. It was nice, though. That's a beautiful area there.
It was
so
fun.
Thanks for taking me out.
We'll do it again.
I agree. We've kind of become pretty good friends it actually reminds me of the story of how Funded Today was formed. My business partner, Thomas Alvord, and I, we spent several years just kind of talking back and forth before anything happened. And eventually we started Funded Today because of just a connection that we had over the years where we would just talk and check in and see what each other were doing. And I decided to hire him for a campaign that we were working on to work on some of the paid media side of things. And what he did was really successful. And we said, that worked out pretty well. Maybe we should try it again. And one led to two led to 10, and eventually we had a business before we knew it. And we'd made over $1 million each before we ever met each other face to face. So crazy story, but
well, that's the best part of the whole story.
Yeah, it was a very interesting It was very interesting, and I think maybe there's something to be said about business partners there. As you are starting a business, get to know the people that you're planning on getting in bed with, because a business partnership might even be more serious than a marriage. There's a crazy thought for you.
There's a crazy thought, or at least equally as crazy, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's easier to get out of a marriage than it is a business relationship if you want to do it right.
Yeah.
Let's just put it
Don't tell your wife that.
Interesting. Yeah, my wife won't listen to this podcast, fortunately, so I think we're safe.
Oh, I'm going to send it to her.
Oh, shoot.
No, but on that's actually something that I wanted to talk about. Like, when you talk about success, how do you talk about success without talking about connections? I mean, connections are so important in business, and you're really good at doing that kind of stuff. I mean, how important for you in your business and in your day-to-day stuff, how important are connections to you?
There is truth to that. And again, you've heard the trite phrase hundreds of times if you're listening to this, most likely. It's not what you know, it's who you know. But it's true. Somebody didn't just... Here's an interesting thought about trite phrases, axioms, maxims, whatever you want to call it. They're true because they work. And the reason they have lasted through time, when we hear a phrase like, it's not what you know, but who you know, it's because somebody somewhere said it, and then it worked, and then another person did it, and it worked, and another person did it, and it worked, and eventually thousands of people were doing it, and it worked, and now it stood the test of time. And it's absolutely the case. Funded Today doesn't become Funded Today without me bringing Thomas Alvord on to do what he did. And that was a relationship that was cultivated over several years that didn't result in anything. And now we became one of the fastest growing privately held companies in America. So yeah, absolutely. It's true. And I don't mind saying that phrase 1,000 times over, because it really is the case. There's a lot of things I can't do. I'm reminded of the story of Henry Ford. And I believe he was getting sued or something for people thinking that he was incompetent, or they were trying to remove him from office. So pardon me for not knowing exactly how it worked for it. But I remember the story going down something like this. And everybody was like, you don't even know how to do anything. You can't build these cars. You don't understand this assembly line thing. He's like, you may very well be right, but on my desk are 9 digits connected to a phone, and I can push any myriad of combination of those 9 digits on my telephone, and I can make anything happen and get anybody to do anything I want them to do. And the judge said, case dismissed. You're smarter than all of us. I think of that story all the time and think about my own life, and there are thousands of things that I'm not very good at. And there's a few things I'm pretty dang good at. But for the most part, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, and I'm just curious. But I know lots of people, and I have lots of people that will do a lot of good things for me, and they can do them very well. And I think that's what's made us very successful. We have the best advertisers. We have the best paid media people. We have the best earned media people. We have the best salespeople. I mean, we've trained them all, and they've become better, and some of them were the best in their fields, and that's what's made Fun Today be able to succeed, not necessarily anything that I've done, other than letting them grow and expand and become better. And as that's happened, the entire company's become better.
And when they win, you win. And
Absolutely.
I think of it the same way. I'm exactly like you are when it comes to that. I'm a jack of every trade and a master of none.
You're good at everything too. That's the difference.
No, I don't know about that. I sure try, though. I do my best. But somebody once said, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk that said, stop focusing on the things that you're bad at and start focusing on the things you're good at, and double down on the things that you're good at. And don't worry so much about, the world sits and tells us to focus on everything that we're bad at. But in my opinion, and in my mind, that creates kind of a negative air in your mind. It's kind of negative self-talk, because then you start focusing on the things that you're not good at, which, we can always get better at things. And that's how I function. Like if I'm not good at something, I push myself more and more, but I found that more success comes from the things that I'm naturally good at. Like things that I'm naturally good at, that I've always been good at, is talking to people and making connections. Like that has always been my strong suit, even since I was a young kid. I remember I was probably 11 years old, and I may have told you this story before, but I was 11 years old, and I'd gone to the Salt Lake City with some folks. It was a junior jazz basketball trip. We went to see the basketball game, and we got on the public transit train, and we were riding it downtown, and I was sitting across from probably early 30s gal, and I actually struck up a conversation with that lady, and I talked to that lady for probably 25-30 minutes, and we just talked and talked, and I don't remember anything of what was said, and I don't honestly remember much about it, but I remember that the people that I was with were completely enamored that I could sit and hold a conversation with somebody that was 3 times my age and just talk with them. And that's always kind of been my strong suit, is making connections and kind of running on empathy. And the most success that I found in my life comes from that. When I try to increase that, then I find myself being more successful.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And I'll just give you a testimonial right now. I can tell that you're genuine, and I could tell that you were genuine probably 3 or 4 weeks into our relationship. For a while, every single day I get lots of emails, lots of Facebook messages, lots of LinkedIn messages, some text messages for people who somehow find my number that way. And most of them are, can I pick your brain? By the way, we should all try to remove that phrase. There's a tip for the listeners. Don't pick people's brains. That sounds like it hurts. Like, yeah. Try to add value somehow. Like, let's not call it pick my brain. I hate that. Right. And I think some guy, Ryan Lee taught me that one at a conference 10 years ago or so, and it's always stuck with me. Again, it's just a phrase, so they're not really trying to pick your brain, but really pick your brain gives this sense that I'm sitting here you're picking my brain and I'm getting nothing out of it and you're destroying my brain.
Right.
So get that out of there. But going back to you, I mean, you're genuine. And the reason you can tell that you're genuine is because you don't really ask for anything. And eventually it's like, well, this guy is just a curious soul. He's like-minded. I understand where he's coming from. And there's something to be said about that. If you're going to try to build a relationship and if you're trying to grow your network, going back to point number 1 that we were talking about, you need to exercise that. Don't think for your first 10 times you interact with someone. Let's call it 10 times. That might seem crazy.
Put a number on it, right?
Yeah, let's call it 10 times. For your first 10 times, literally don't even think what's in this for me. Just think, how can I help this person? And it's tough and it's painful and it feels one-sided. But if you can get through 10 times of where you're really figuring out what you can do to help somebody, they're going to feel indebted to you without you even needing to guilt trip them. And there's power in that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. You shouldn't say so many nice things about me.
I only speak the truth. If you knew me in person, I say a lot of mean things about it's whatever it is how I say it. I try to just keep it very real.
Oh, and that's how I am. Like, I genuinely want to get to know people. Like, I've always had this fascination with people and understanding. And sometimes my wife, she's an introvert, and it kind of drives her crazy. She's like, how can you talk with all these people, and how can you try to connect with every one of them? And it's just something about people that fascinates me. And I've always been that way. But there's some people, I was drawn to you instantly. There was something about, there's just certain people that I've always been drawn to, and it's a specific kind of people. They're very charismatic, but yet they have an air of success, and they know what they want from life, and they almost hold an air of power to them. And I've always been attracted to folks like you, and I think that's kind of, what drew me in about you and what made me pursue our relationship as friends. I've always appreciated that about you. And it's been an awesome year knowing you and telling people that I know you. Like, when that Inc. magazine article came out, I was like, I know that guy.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We got featured on the Inc. 5000 list this year for one of America's fastest growing privately held companies. So
right. And what number were you?
We were number 27, but 27. We were number 2 for Utah.
And that's pretty big, because Utah's a growing metropolis of businesses. Silicon
Slopes, as they like to call it. So
it's growing, and I mean, kudos to you guys. That's amazing. But I don't want to draw away from your business at all, but I want to kind of talk about more of the mental game. People, their whole life they search for something. They're always, we spend our whole life chasing something, and for a lot of people that's money. But you've kind of been there and done that on money. So where do you go? Where do you feel like you go? How do you find fulfillment? Because you've made your millions. And how old are you, Zach?
31. Going to be 32 in April.
Yeah, exactly. So you're 32 years old and you've made your millions. But now we had a conversation the other day, and I hope you don't mind me bringing it up, but we were talking about fulfillment. Where do you go now, and how do you maintain happiness? How do you do it?
That's a good question. I think it's a question that full transparency, I still wrestle with a little bit as well, because if I just quit everything today and everything stopped, I'd probably be fine unless I lived to be like 120 years old or something. And even then I might be okay. And so the question comes, well, what am I doing? Why am I running Funded Today? Why am I doing some of these other businesses? And I think about that question quite often. Do I have a perfect answer yet? No, but I do have some thoughts, so I guess I could share those. Thought number 1, you need to do something. It's easy for me to say, okay, well, let's just travel the world now or something. And I did do that for a time. I mean, even this last year, I probably spent 2 or 3 months completely away from business. I hiked Mount Everest Base Camp all the way to Kalapatar. I spent some time in India. I toured Myanmar in Burma. We spent some time out living in these bamboo huts, essentially, that were stilts on the middle. I mean, it's literally a group of people. It's called Inle Lake, and it's a group of people that live on this lake. And it's completely and totally removed from anything you'd experience in America, for example. So those kind of things are great, and it gave me a lot of perspective. And with that perspective, I kind of realized the world is so big. We talk about the world being small and what the internet can do to bring us all closer together, but the world is also big. And when you realize that you are just a small dot, and you go to India, billions of people, and it seems like it's more congested and crowded than even a New York City or a San Francisco or something here in America. And you think, man, no one knows who I am here. I've got this cool business, but there isn't a person in all of India who's ever heard of it, And I think to bring it back home, when we realize that we are just a dot out of the 7-point-something billion people that live in the world now, I think we can learn to care a little bit more about other people. And that's kind of what I've started to do. I wasn't as good about it earlier in my life, but the first thing you can do when you quote unquote have it all, and by have it all, we're going to have to do a lot of defining, right?
We're going to have to define all these.
Yeah. I have something I believe in, and it's still getting fleshed out, but it's called holistic harmonization. I call it harmonization rather than balance, because balance feels like it's black and white. It's a teeter-totter. You're either on or you're off. I don't like that. I think in order to have a great life, you have to have harmony, like a piano. When you play all the chords and keys together, it sounds beautiful. I play the piano a little bit, and there's something to be said about harmony. And so our lives need to be harmonious too. Well, what does that mean? It's different for everybody, but there's a few basic things, right? You need your food and your shelter. You need to have good health. But then what else? So you ask yourself, well, who is Carson Jorgensen? Who is Zach Smith? And I say, well, Zach Smith is a curious soul. Well, what does a curious soul mean? Well, a curious soul is somebody who is a voracious reader, a person who asks a lot of questions, a person who likes to explore the world. And then you go on there. Well, Zach Smith is an athlete. What does that mean? He likes to play indoor soccer. He likes to exercise. He's in good shape. He has 6 or 8-pack abs. He can bench 275 pounds and squat 425, right? And you just get down to all these different things, and you have all of these different categories and subcategories for who you are as a person. And once you've got all that fleshed out, then you say, well, what else is Zach Smith? What else is Zach Smith missing? And then you try out those new things. And you say, well, I'm going to try out rock climbing to see if that is Zach Smith as an athlete. And you say, no, that didn't work for me. Or, oh, that's great. I'm going to add that to my portfolio of who I am as a person. And that's how I think we can ultimately achieve happiness. We can add in all of these different elements and figure out what works, and then we rate ourselves. If Zach Smith is an athlete, I say, well, how much of an athlete am I? And I say 0, I'm completely out of shape and I couldn't play in a soccer game if my life depended on it. And 10, I'm playing in the MLS. Or if I'm a basketball player, I could be as good as being in the NBA. And then you rate yourself. And if you're a 5 or below, but you think you're an athlete, well, then what can I do to improve myself? Well, it looks like I'm low on this subcategory and I'm higher on this subcategory. And you just do that, and you go through and you audit all the different categories in your life. And by doing so, you truly figure out what your definition of success is and what your definition of happiness is. And I have seen this change quite a few lives. I haven't taught this. I haven't written a book on it. I just kind of preach it because it's something that I'm applying in my own life. I did it with my wife. She explored a bunch of different things, and now she has things she didn't even know that were a part of her. But once she explored them and she found they were a part of her, it completely changed her life. She has more friends now. She's doing things she never did before. And it's all because she created this holistic harmonization portfolio, I guess you would say. It kind of looks like a spider map when you draw it all the way out. You've got yourself in the middle and a bunch of different branches and everything coming out of it. And then she spent a month and tried some things out. Then she spent another month and tried some things out, learned what she liked, learned what she didn't like. And then every quarter or so, she tries something new, and she keeps adding to things and subtracting to things and refining who she is holistically so that she can achieve that sort of harmony that ultimately creates true happiness. The kind of happiness that is completely and utterly imbalanced when you focus specifically just on money.
Yeah. And that seems to be where people focus. And that's a cool thing. I'm going to have to try that, because people always, I guess my mom always used to call it well-rounded. You're well-rounded. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, that's a great way to say it. Well-rounded, but I have so many aspects, and when I meet new people, they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, that's kind of a hard question for me to answer. On one hand, I own my own business and I build horse bridles and I engrave. And on the other hand, I help on the ranch and do that kind of stuff. But then there's another facet where I make videos and put them on the internet. and I help people run social media marketing for their businesses. And then those are all things that I love. Some I love more than others. You know?
I mean, let's talk about self-awareness. It sounds like you're pretty self-aware. You understand quite a bit about who you are, where you want to be, and what you're good at. I think a lot of people might not even understand that.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is ask a bunch of people, well, who am I? What do I do? And they'll tell you, and you might be surprised. And if you're surprised, guess what? You don't have good self-awareness.
You're missing something.
And that's fine. You can learn that, and then you can start to recognize things. And by asking other people, hey, what am I good at? I don't necessarily know.
Yeah.
If that's you, that's perfectly fine to admit and be candid about it. I don't know what I'm good at. Can you give me a few things? And if you hear crickets, that could be worrisome too. So
right.
But that's good to start asking those questions. You got to go somewhere, and you've got to be self-aware, and then you've got to be receptive of the feedback that you receive, and not let it hurt, even though it will hurt. It might sting.
It's gonna sting.
That's fine. That's the true test of character and how you can ultimately experience change. No change came about without pain. So I'd say recognize that. In my own life, I can tell you on the wealth side of things, I lost a marriage. I had lots of health issues. I had all kinds of things, but I was dominating on the wealth side of things. It was more like balance, right?
Right.
It wasn't harmony. I was completely one-sided on a particular aspect of my life. But as I learned to harmonize, I had the best of both worlds. I got my business even better. I made even more money than I ever made before when I thought I was wealthy. I found a better relationship, and I got married to an amazing lady. You can even attest to that. You've met her a few times.
She's great. Professional
opera singer. She's nice. She's kind. She's gentle. She's caring. I mean, there's really nothing wrong about her. I could go on, write a whole book. I could write a book on Courtney.
Yeah.
So I lucked out. I don't know if a lot of people would potentially be able to luck out the way that I did.
And I got lucky too, somehow or another. Everybody always asks me that all the time. How did she end up with you? And it's like, well, she got lucky.
Yeah, that must be how it all plays out. But I think it does have something to come down.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness, harmony, understanding what you want and what you're after, and really recognizing who you are. You can attract the type of people that are going to fit really well into your model, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, and I don't know if people sometimes understand what they really want. When you talk about self-awareness, and once again, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk, and he said, if I could grant one power to anybody, it would be to make you self-aware, to understand who you really are, because we spend so much of our lives basing how we feel about ourselves on what other people think of us, not who we actually are. I mean, our perception of ourselves is shaped by what everybody else around us. But if we can get inside of our own head and figure out who we really are and what we really want and define what we want from our lives, that's when we can start shaping our life how we want it to be.
And I've listened to quite a bit of Gary Vaynerchuk and watched quite a bit of what he creates too. And I love when he talks about self-awareness, because he's like, I interrupt people a lot. I understand that. And when he says things like that, he actually becomes more personable and more relatable, because when you listen to him, you do see him interrupt people. And then maybe he admits, I swear a lot. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should. Maybe that's my style. I don't know. When he says those things, you're like, well, he understands it.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to critique him on that? It sounds like he understands where he's coming from. When you do that, you show empathy. And when you show empathy, you can create real bonds with people. And that's why Gary Vaynerchuk is perhaps the most famous internet type of entrepreneur around.
Oh, yeah. And I just, on that same subject, it just came up across Instagram today while I was eating lunch. It was a video, and a lady asked him, well, why do you have to swear so much? And he says, it's because I'm being authentic. Like he says, when it comes to my mind, that's just what I say. And he says, there's bigger problems in the world than me swearing. Like that's down there a ways on the list of bad things, We should do our best we can, but I'm definitely not perfect in that area. But it's authentic, and like you say, it makes him more relatable because he does recognize it, and you're like, that makes a lot of sense. And he's not trying to shove it down your throat like you need to be this way. He says, this is what I do, and this is who I am. And I think there's a lot of things to be said for that.
If you're worried about people and what they think of you, and I think most people care about what other people think. They might say they don't, but Say a couple mean things to them and see how they react.
Right.
they'll care. For people who feel that way, and again, I think I'm speaking to most, if you worry about what other people think about you, be self-aware and tell people that you're self-aware. Recognize those things, and you'll find that people will actually like you more.
Right.
And you'll probably hear less bad things about you because people will start to see the good in you because they'll realize that you recognize the bad.
Right.
And you'll actually be happier that way too. So
beat them to the punch. If you can recognize,
Yeah.
if you can recognize your faults before they do and acknowledge them before they can, they have no legs to stand on anymore.
Yep.
And but how much of our life? People think what people think. We spend so much of our life buying clothes. I don't do this, but I see a lot of people do it. But people are buying clothes to impress people that they don't really like, that they want to fit in with, but they don't like. So you spend money to impress people you don't like, and you don't do things in your own life because you want to impress people or you don't want people to think bad at you, and you end up living in unhappiness because you're letting what people think justify what you're doing in your life. And how sad is that?
It's an interesting phenomenon. Maybe even a paradox. It seems like it can't be true, but it is. We again kind of all fall guilty to that in many respects. And devil's advocate to that point, let's say you're completely overweight. You're obese by a medical definition of that. You probably shouldn't continue to eat terribly.
Right.
Even because everybody's like, well, that person's overweight. That person's fat. That whatever they want to say, and you're probably hearing those things if you are that type of a person. Well, in that case, my advice would not be to do what you feel and be happy and embrace it, right? So there is a devil's advocate point. You need to kind of shape up a bit too, unless you want to die, I guess, or if you want to not be able to live the best life. I talk about freedom, and for me, freedom is lots of different things. One of your freedoms has to be health. If I have all the money in the world, but I'm unhealthy, whether I have something that debilitates me so that I can't move around or I can't do what I want, when I want, how I want, well, then I don't have true freedom. I only have one component of freedom. And there's a lot of elements to what freedom is. And I think freedom is what also creates happiness.
Right. And I've tried to put my finger on it, what it is. And I'm really the same way. I believe that to find balance, you have to pull from equal directions. I mean, on one hand, you've got ego, and on the other hand, you have humility. And in between those two pulling against each other is where you find balance. And I feel the same way with what people think about me. On one hand, I really do not care what anybody thinks of me. The only person's opinion who matters to me is my own. But on the next hand, I want people to think I'm a good person. I want people to know that I'm genuine and that I'm out for their best interest, and I want them to win and succeed just as much. And I care about that.
Absolutely.
And so people always get caught in it. Well, you say you don't care what people think about you, but yet you care what everybody thinks. And for me, it's the balance that come between the two. At night, I only have to sleep in my own head. Like it's my conscience and it's my person that I have to live with.
I'm a huge fan of the Stoics, Stoicism. I don't know if you've studied that at all.
I haven't.
Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, one of the last great Roman emperors. Maybe even Plato would fit into that. But the idea is to be able to do everything you can in your power, but realize that there's still things that are completely outside of your control, and to be good with that, to roll with the punches, come what may, and love it. And playing off of of the way that you go about it, I'm much the same way. I think of a quote by Plato where he said something along the lines of, when men or women speak ill of thee, live so that nobody will believe them. People are going to talk crap on you. People are going to say mean, terrible things about you. But the way you live will be how eventually the majority of people decide to judge you. So no matter what anybody says about you, if you live your life in a way that completely goes against what all the naysayers and ill speakers and backbiters are saying about you, in the end, that's all that's going to matter. And those are where the history books ultimately decide what is said and what is not said about us.
Time is the ultimate scorekeeper.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that's as true as it gets right there, because I don't ever want people to say bad things about me. I don't.
But they will.
But they will. Like, people are good. People are inherently nasty. And people,
it's easier to talk crap than it is to think of something nice to say.
Right. I mean, you even to yourself, when you're talking to yourself and you're thinking things, you could think of 5,000 things that are wrong, but try and say something good about yourself. And it takes a minute.
Yeah.
And I think people really need to practice that. They need to practice finding what's good and what their strengths are and focusing on those and really building yourself up that way instead of tearing yourself down. And
once you've maximized and dominated on your strengths, then and only then can you go and focus on the weaknesses. It's perfectly fine then, but until you've really mastered who you are, you've developed that self-awareness, you found the 2 or 3 things that you're better than anybody else at, or at least world class at, well then great. Now that you've capitalized on those, and now that you feel good about yourself and you're 75% of the way harmonized, go and try the 25% of the things that you're weak on. That's how I go about tackling weaknesses in my own life.
That's awesome. And I need to do more of that. But I'm the same. I'm always just looking for something new and looking for the next thing and just try everything. Like, I can't tell people enough, just try. But they say, well, people, yeah, that's the first thing that comes to your head, isn't it? Well, people will think. Mm-hmm. When it comes to, social media.
Here's some good advice too. And sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I agree. I even think that sometimes myself, but I have a way of getting out of that. Well, people are going to think this, or people are going to say this, or people are going to think that. Guess what? They're actually not. Most people are so concerned with what's going on in their own life and in their own head, they actually don't even care about you. And that's sad and terrible, but it's kind of the truth. People are going to care about you when you're kind to them, when you're nice to them, when you're respectful to them. And even then, they might forget about you. Right. And so don't worry about what other people think, because everybody's so worried about what's going on in their own life, they don't necessarily even have time to worry about other people.
No.
And quite frankly, who cares? It's not like they're going to change you.
No. And that's when it comes down to, you have to know who you are. Like, it all, like, when I go back on everything, it all comes back to self-awareness. Like, it is the ultimate key to somebody being successful or being happy or whatever you want to call it. Self-awareness is the ultimate. And I've spent my life and I worry about it all the time. I'm like, what if I'm stuck in my own head and I think I'm this good person and I get on this high horse and I'm really not. Mm-hmm. But I know that I'm not because of the way I treat other people or the thoughts I have towards other people. And honestly, it's probably one of the most difficult skills to develop, if you ask me.
No, it is. When you think you have it, then you realize you have something else that you didn't get. It happened to me a couple days ago. I thought I was completely self-aware about a certain thing, and then I got a lot of feedback. I'm someone who always solicits feedback, to my wife's chagrin, and some other people's chagrin too. Why do you let people say these kinds of things about you? It's so terrible. How can you be happy through that? I'm like, well, immediately after I read it, I'm not necessarily happy, but as I ponder and as I reflect and as I apply some of the things, I feel like I become a better person. And so why wouldn't I want to do that? Because I'm not where I need to be yet.
Right.
And she's sometimes like, okay, well, I guess, but please don't tell me about it anymore or something, And again, I think that's just a protective thing that any spouse would probably have. But for me, I like it because it helps me see where I might not be able to see.
Right. And I'm the same way. I had a video on Facebook that kind of, I would guess you would call it viral. It had like 1.2 million views in 4 or 5 days. And there was 18 or 1900 comments on there. And I commented on every single one of them, good or bad. But I went through and read every one of them and then commented back to all of them. But I would say 1,800 of the 1,900 comments were positive. Like, people were like, this is a great message, But then the other 100 were like, you should go hang yourself, or why don't you jump off a bridge, or do us all a favor and go die, one of those kind of deals. Mm-hmm. And I was like, so we've got 1,800 comments that were positive, and we've got 100 people who aren't unhappy with themselves and can't say anything constructively negative. And so I'm like, I must be on the right path. And I think it's things like that We've got to hear what people say. We've got to see feedback. It's like if you come up with a product and you love it, but nobody else does, if you don't listen to your customers and your clients, you're never going to get it right.
Oh, absolutely. And what I've said is pretty much anybody who invents something thinks it's the best thing they've ever invented. Otherwise, they didn't create it. So of the 3,000 something people we've worked with now, I tell every one of them when I can, please do not be attached to your baby. Attach yourself to success, whatever that may be. That might be your third or fourth baby. And this first baby's he's going out with the bathwater.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have to, and it's hard to do. Attach yourself to the idea and the definition of success and not to what your idea in the first place was. And if you do that, as I've seen with lots and lots of our creators, those that disband and pivot and change after the first bad idea, the second idea, maybe even the third, and have success on the fourth, fifth, and sixth, those are the ones that really win and they just get it. You are not a failure. Your product is a failure. Distance yourself from that and you can be a lot happier.
Right. And if we can separate ourselves from money and products and whatever it is, our feelings as a human being and our, how would you say it? Our relationship with ourselves as a human being has nothing to do with how much money is in our bank account or how well any of our products sell. Like, I know
Absolutely.
Great people that are poor as can be, and they're fine with it, and it's okay. But I know people that have tons of money that are just about worthless, and you don't want to be around them. And people need to realize that who they are has nothing to do with how much money is in their bank account.
Absolutely. I mean, I talked about these freedoms earlier, but it's an idea that's been ruminating in my mind for the last, year and a half or so. Right now I call it I'm calling it the 6 freedoms, but it might be 7, who knows, maybe I'll cut them down. But this is what I truly think people need to be, well, let's call it happy. The first is time freedom. And time freedom is basically just the ability to do what you want, when you want to, whenever.
Right.
And then you got number 2, your financial freedom. We've talked about this one quite a bit. The ability to not have to work, or if you want to work only when you want to work, or the ability to work when and where you want to work and only do work you love or enjoy.
Right.
And then your health freedom, the ability to do what you want, when you want, because your health or fitness does not hinder or restrict you in any way. And now we get into the more abstract freedoms. This is your spiritual freedoms, that you're free from sin and addiction that would cause you to engage in any type of behavior that you don't want to, but you're addicted to it, and so you still do it. You're not spiritually free in that case. And then mental freedom, your inner peace type freedom, no stress, no worries. So, that's kind of where we're going here. What if you were still happy and at peace, but you are not free on any above?
Right.
Well, what sort of a freedom would that be? Take away your business success. Are you still happy? You can think of the biblical account of Job. He lost his wife. He got his skin completely destroyed. He lost all of his property. He lost everything. And in the end, he was still happy, and he still said, God, whatever happens, I'm fine with it. And what happened? He ended up getting everything back tenfold. So that's kind of what I'm working with right now. How you make yourself free in each of these separate respects, because when you are truly free holistically, that's where true freedom comes and true happiness comes. And that's where you'll feel successful in every facet of your life.
Oh, yeah. And I'm 100% with you. It's funny how you get on these things that you think about a lot. And it sounds like you've really thought about that a lot. And for me, the last year has been a real, I wouldn't say struggle, but a real search for self-awareness and how to project that on other people. And it's just funny how these facets in our lives that we kind of focus on really drive us and turn us in a certain direction for what we're going to become or what we want to become. And as we focus on those things, I always tell everybody, the more I learn, the more I find out I don't know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a phenomenon to that. I believe, what is that thing called? The Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard of that before?
No.
Okay.
I'm learning all kinds of new stuff, and I'm game for it.
Let's see the best way to describe it. Let's see. Okay, how about, so there's this quote by Bertrand Russell. He says, one of the painful things about our time is that one of the painful things about our time is that those who feel certainty are stupid, and those with any imagination and understanding are filled with doubt and indecision. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a slightly more specific case of the bias known as illusory superiority, where people tend to overestimate their good points in comparison to others around them, while concurrently underestimating their negative points. And so you see the smartest people thinking they are less smart, and the dumbest people thinking they are more smart, and the Dunning-Kruger effect essentially in effect. people miss adequately assessing their level of competence or their incompetence, and thus considering themselves much more competent than everyone else. And it's, again, coming back to your point, a lack of self-awareness.
You know, I have a friend, and he owned a multi-million-dollar company where they sold heavy machinery parts, and he always tells me, he says, those who know don't say, and those who say don't know.
There it is.
And it's just, it all comes back to that, and it all has to come down. I mean, we keep coming around and round back to this, and I talked about it earlier. Everything points back to self-awareness and to know yourself, to know who you are. And that's really what it all boils down to. But back there a minute ago, you said something about the most successful people you knew. And you said that they all had one thing in common, and that was that they were able to pivot and to change, because we all get stuck on an idea. But we've got to be humble enough to change. And there's so many people who have no humility in any aspect of their life. And I mean, humility goes a long ways, not just in business, but in life. The ability to say, I'm sorry, or the ability to say I was wrong. That hurts. And that was one of the things that took me the longest to learn. So, I mean, how in your life, how much of a role does that take?
One of my mentors, whom I consider a really good friend, Tad Collister, he had something that he said once to me 10 years ago, and I think he said it to a bunch of other people as well. And again, I might not get it right, but he said, my greatest fear is that I will become proud of my humility. And it makes a lot of sense. He still is a really humble person, one of the smartest people you ever meet, an exceptional attorney, a powerful orator. He can make an argument about anything, and by the end you're like, wow, okay, I believe. I kind of think of him as Malcolm Gladwell in a way, where I don't know if you've listened to any Malcolm Gladwell, but every time I listen to Gladwell, even if I disagree with him, by the end I'm like, man,
he's got a point.
He's got a strong point there, and I don't know what the counter is. So Collister's that way in that sense, and I love that phrase, because he knew enough about what he didn't know to know what he still didn't know.
Right.
And that self-awareness is very powerful, because a person who doesn't know anything about a given subject would have no appreciation to understand how much there is to learn about it. And you can say that about almost anything. I've been playing this game called Spikeball recently, and it's kind of a new sport. And you wouldn't think there's all these things about it. And I thought I was pretty good, and then I go play against some of the best people in the world, and they absolutely destroy me. And I was like, holy cow. I thought I was good at this game because I'm an athlete and all these other things, but there's so much more to know about this game called Spikeball from these people that are the best in the world at it, that I never would have thought I was that much worse than them.
Yeah.
You know? And so I grossly overestimated my level of understanding of the sport, and basically Dunning-Kruger effect again.
But it brings you back to earth.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It's pain. And you said it earlier too. You said that things that hurt are the things that make us change. And getting your butt whooped at Spikeball makes you want to change, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially for somebody like me. I'm one of the most fierce competitors you'll ever meet. If I don't try to become the best at something, then I don't necessarily have fun. And it's probably one of my greatest strengths and one of my greatest weaknesses, but I can't just go and play a soccer game and have fun. I have to win.
But it's that quest. It's that quest for that's fun. I'm that way. Like, I devour something. When I want to master it, I devour it. But when I get to the point where I'm really proficient and I can compete at the highest level, I'm talking in any aspect of anything. You talk about video editing, engraving, building bits and spurs, playing basketball. When I get to that point, I almost lose interest. Like you say, it's one of my greatest strengths and my greatest weakness, because I have to make sure I stay hooked on some things that I need to stay hooked on, even though I don't want to, because I lose all my drive at some point. And that's why I love starting businesses, and that's why I almost love starting businesses more than I like doing anything else.
Yeah. And I would say one thing to be careful of is make sure that you see things through. Seeing things through means that you know that you've given it your very best shot. There's a lot of studies on multitasking out there, and I've seen this in my own life. When I go all in on something, I tend to do it way better than if I'm trying to give a little bit of effort to 4 or 5 different things and I'm spinning a bunch of different plates all at once and trying to keep them all spinning. There's something to be said of that. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot do that. That's where the power of outsourcing and leverage and utilizing people that are better, smarter, and more competent than you in everything comes into hand. And that's the true power of somebody who's mastered entrepreneurship. So absolutely. But when you are looking to improve, dialing in on one specific thing and just becoming a master at it for whatever amount of time you need to be able to measure those results, you're going to see much more significant progress. And usually if you don't go about it this way, you're just never going to get to the level that you truly need to get to if you want to consider yourself a master.
Right. And and it all comes back to what you want to be. Like, if you don't want to be a master, that's great. That's fine. But if you want to be a master of it, you have got to stay hooked.
And that's the holistic harmonization I've been preaching this whole episode. You've got to figure out what you are, who you are as a person, because you may be some of the things I'm describing today, and you may be some of the things, you may not be many of these things. And like you said earlier, some people are perfectly happy with whatever $40,000 a year can do. And others might need $1 million to get there. And that's perfectly fine. That's why I just don't think wealth matters nearly as much as we all tend to think it does. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't even know exactly how best to articulate that, but you've got to figure out. Here's good advice. If you're not a millionaire yet, if you're not making tons of money yet, figure out if you're happy right now. And if you are, memorize that. Articulate that feeling you have. Write down the thoughts you have now. Because one day when you become really rich and successful, try to remember how you felt when you went through this little exercise, this little self-audit of yourself today. And you will be so much better off when you have all the money in the world if you can go back to that self-awareness that you had X number of days, months, years ago when you did what I'm describing to do. I wish I would have done that. I can think back, but I can't quite remember everything. It still pains me to spend $50 at a restaurant. So I know I still have some of that stuff in me. You know what I mean?
Got it.
I've still got it, but I don't know exactly. Was I happy then? I've actually done quite a bit of self-research this last year. I went back and read journals that I had, notes that I had, different goals and things that I had. And I could tell I was striving for something more. That striving for me is kind of gone, at least in the sense for the things I used to be striving for. Now it's different things. Now it's knowledge. Now it's understanding. Now it's empathy. It's things that I never really thought about before. But back then it was, I want to have $2.5 million saved by the time I'm 30 in some sort of IRA fund that's going to get me 8% a year. You know, that was the kind of stuff I wrote down.
Right.
So,
but that was what your focus was, and that was what was important, because that was what was missing in your life. And I think now you're to the point where you've got all that, and now you kind of feel like, you know, maybe there's a little empathy missing, or maybe there's a little something else missing that you need to have, and that's now what your purpose is.
And I'd say do it now. Do what I'm doing now before you're where I am now, and I think you'll be even better off.
And we've got to remember that, and I think that's the reason we need to remember that, is because we'll if you really truly want to be successful and you stay hooked, you're going to get, and when I say successful, it's all going to depend on what your definition of it is. But when you become successful to the place where you're happy, don't forget where you came from, because there are people who are in that same spot, and we need to have empathy. we need to remember what it felt like to not be able to. I told this story on the podcast last week. I remember at one point in time, about a year and a half after starting my business, we were out of money. And I mean, when I say out, I mean out. And I'm like, I'm on the way home. I'm just going to stop and get a soda pop. Like, that's all I want. Like, I stopped to do it, and I ran my card, and it wouldn't go through. So I scrounged around in my truck, and I found what money was in the truck to pay for the drink. And I went home and looked on the bank account, and in my account, between all of them put together, there was $1.42. This was probably 8 months before I met you. And I mean, you want to talk about the feeling of despair, and I will never forget that feeling. And as long as I live, and I know there are other people out there who feel the exact same way, and I don't want them to have to feel that way.
Yeah.
And so it's empathy that drives all that. And I think that's just another thing that we've got to remember is there's always somebody that's worse off than you are.
Grass is never greener on the other side.
No.
You might think I have a good life, but you'd probably be in my life for a while and be like, hell, maybe I'm happy with where I'm at now.
I did a video about it a while ago. I was tending some sheep this spring. There was a bunch of sheep. There was 60 or 80 of them. And all they wanted was to go somewhere else. They wanted to go to this other particular pasture, and that is all they wanted. They would not. I would leave them at night, and I'd come back in the morning, they were gone. And I was like, are you kidding me? And they'd travel 2 or 3 miles. And I was fine. Like, I just put them back every day where they go. Put them back. Finally, I was like, okay, that's it. So I grabbed the water troughs, loaded them on the truck, moved them to where they wanted to go. No sooner did I move those water troughs, and they were where they wanted to be and where they were fighting to be, they turn around and go back to where they were. And now they decided, like, you want to talk about the grass is greener on the other side of the fence? It was the perfect example. And it was like, honestly, one of the more spiritual and humbling experiences of my life, because it was so simple, but yet so profound all at the same time. And it finally made sense because I was so mad. I was like, why will you not stay here? Like, all you want, fine, have it. Here it is. And they didn't want it. And it was just a life lesson. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a good place to end it. It's just, the grass isn't always greener, but figure out who you are.
Oh, absolutely.
And
there's something to be said about lifelong learning. There's so many good quotes on never being satisfied with where you're at and striving. For me, right, I said I'm not no longer striving for anything. And so, well, what is it that I need to do? Where can I go from here when I've got everything I ever thought I wanted? And it's kind of come back to the idea of knowledge and learning. And I get very excited when I learn things, or I find something, or I look at something, or I organize something in a new and exciting way. For me, that's the true, real thrill that I'm getting out of life at this stage.
Right. It's just finding your purpose, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Shakespeare kind of said it best: the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool.
Amen to that. Like, the more I learn I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And you're self-aware enough to understand that there's things that you don't know because of what you do know. And that's perfectly fine. Those who think they know never learn.
Exactly. And I mean, here, this is how I like to end it, Zach. We've talked about it about the whole time, but this is the last question for you. How do you define success?
That is a good question. If I were to define success, it would be two definitions. An inward definition where I am perfectly and completely content with the conversation that is happening daily inside my own mind. That's my first definition.
You bet.
I'm successful if I believe I'm successful. Doesn't matter what anybody else says. And I'm not defining success by anything other than whatever that means to me in my head. And then the other definition is we have to look outward too.
Yeah.
Are we successful based upon what everybody else would describe that? And people may look at success and say, Elon Musk is very successful because of what he's done with several different businesses. And Steve Jobs was successful with Apple. And maybe someone like me would say, well, Steve Jobs was successful with Apple, but maybe he could have been nicer and kinder to some of the people that work for him. So maybe I'll give him a 60% on the definition of success.
Right.
So for me, the definition of success as it is defined by everybody else but ourselves would be the holistic approach. How well do we holistically embody everything that the word of the definition of success encompasses? And then what will the history books ultimately say about us?
Who will be at your funeral?
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
All right. Well, there you have it. My exclusive interview with Carson Jorgensen. Make sure you check out his podcast, The Definition of Success. And remember, next time we've got a really special one for you. We're getting into Amazon and how to make big money on that rising platform. I think you're going to love it. That'll be a great one. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Remember, don't wait until tomorrow. Get funded today.
Funded Today is the worldwide leader in rewards-based crowdfunding on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Combined, they have raised over $200 million and counting for thousands of new ideas and inventions worldwide. If you've got an idea for a new product or invention, visit fundedtoday.com to speak with one of their experts.